guys. Thanks for everyone who's joined so far. And thank you, Ryan. Good to have you on. Thanks for doing this. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about landing whales, winning big customers, big enterprise customers. And Ryan's a bit of an expert on this. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing what you're doing today and why you know so much about enterprise selling?
Yeah, no problem, man. Well, happy to be on, and I'll be observing the chat. So feel free to pop in and ask questions as we're kind of going throughout, so we can make it highly interactive and valuable for you. But just as a quick backstory on me, so you understand, you're like, who's this random guy from the States and talking about this? So I don't want to say I'm like a grizzled veteran when it comes to sales, but I've been in the sales capacity for about 22 years. The last 10 years as a leader. And, I just founded my company this year. And so kind of how I got to that point was throughout my career, I was always one of those people that try to figure things out on his own and just grind and work hard. And it's kind of funny because, Alex, I was never like out of the chute a top producer, never. Like I was always what you call a little bit of a late bloomer. But then I would have exponentially better results than 99% of the field. And so what happened as I evolved over that time is there's certain patterns or things that I ran into that I saw that made an exponential jump while decreasing the amount of time that I needed to work. And I saw that as a sales executive. And then I saw that once I created an enterprise team from scratch. And so basically, like I'll get more into the enterprise when I started that from scratch. It was for about a period of about 6.5, 7 years. And basically the company said to me, hey, Ryan, we want to move up market, which I'm sure people hear and say all the time. And so like, go start an enterprise team. There's no playbook, no staff, nothing. So I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. And as I kind of went through that, I started to figure patterns. And so we grew from 0 to 30 million in annual reoccurring revenue. With only 3 people focused on that area over a period of about 5 or 6 years. And so the primary catalyst for that were certain things, not just with the companies we targeted, but how we approach customers. And basically, we ended up getting over 35 whales, and what I would classify as whales, over 550K or more, over 125 million in contracts. And then there's some really cool things that happened is, my team, what I saw is there was people that would go from making 120 grand to 600 grand in like 18 months. There was another guy whose previous best, like he was in sales for 30 years and jumped from basically 270K to 600K in a year. And so by helping my team do that, that scaled results really fast without adding any headcount, without any outside investment, and without any risk. And so once I saw that materialize and happen, then I got kind of hooked on the concept of it. And so that's what I'm doing now is I'm helping organizations scale without risk, outside investment, or headcount adds. And it's been great so far. So
awesome. Thanks for that, Ryan. That's a great intro. And we'll unpack some of those areas in a second. And guys, everyone on the webinar, please keep questions coming like as we go. We'll try and keep things pretty interactive, and we'll try and get to all the questions as well. So Ryan, let's just start it off and talk about companies who are looking to go up market. What are the first, where do they start?
Yeah. And so like, it's funny because I've been working on this a lot with my advisory clients, and it's funny because you see patterns that happen. And the primary pattern that I'm seeing is most people focus kind of ish on ICP, which is ideal customer profile. And it's funny because like, I think now with today's market and all the uncertainty, whether it be in the US or New Zealand or wherever you're at in the world, is like, I think ICP is not good enough anymore. I think ICP is dead. So what I am having and helping people do to scale, the first thing is identify not their ideal customer profile, but their perfect customer profile. So think of it this way. It's more along the lines of, if you want to scale your business, how do you replicate your number one customer instead of having one top customer that pays you 40% of your revenue in a year. How do you get 3, 4, 5, 6 of those, right? That's one way. And then the other way is how do you exponentially increase the size that that your biggest customers are paying you? So that's like a primary area that I focused on initially. And there's really like 4 categories within the perfect customer profile. There's the standard demographics component. There's the title component. On top of it too, there's also the trigger event, like the compelling event in that period of time that it happens. And then to go up market, like customers expect so much more because they're spending a lot more money with you. So you have to nail down the vertical and the psychographics really, really tightly to be able to execute on that and scale that. So that's what I would say is the number one thing to focus on to start.
Okay, so figure out who is the customer. Unpack the psychographics piece a little bit for everyone, please.
Yeah, no problem. And so like within there, there's numerous things embedded, right? When you're looking at that. And so like, it's funny, because we were starting, like I told you, we were starting from scratch to build that enterprise team. And so as a byproduct, the company already had customers that were good customers. So what I did is I sat back and I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at the top 10 customers that we got over the last 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months. And I'm going to look for patterns there. And so what was kind of funny is we looked at not just at the company level, like, okay, what verticals they're in. And a funny thing happened when we looked at this is we would see that reps would focus on the same type of customers across different verticals evenly, whereas there was one vertical that would get us 10 times the amount of revenue with the same amount of sales cycle time, with the same amount of conversions, but nobody was laser focused on that vertical. So that's an example. The psychographics is more down to the individual. So when you're talking higher ticket deals, as you can imagine, it exponentially expands the number of people that are engaged or involved in that decision-making process, right? So what you're gonna see is there's personality traits that are consistent, but there's also just like even simple things like when you're looking almost at like Facebook ads that, you know, we found that there's patterns where some of the guys that really liked our program were heavy drinkers and big partiers. They really enjoyed sports. They preferred to work with men 70% of the time and women 30, like down to that level of truly understanding all your buyers and what they're doing at the individual level. So
right, okay. So then you can speak that language when you're talking to them. So then you can, you know, bring in conversation points that you know they're going to care about, or, you know, even as simple as using words, you know, when you're selling that, you know, speaking the same language as your buyer.
Well, it does a lot of things. It's language. It's a virtuous cycle because you know where they hang out, where they live, what they enjoy. And so it starts to really give you a full understanding of that. And then one really cool area that helped us scale massively is, and people are going to think this is weird, but like there are so many niche organizations and a lot of the younger folks tend to focus on all the online communities. There's so many offline specific, like I'll give you an example. There was a group that we got involved with that basically was specific to retail IT executives. And we connected with people at the board level there, developed relationships, and got referred into an opportunity that ended up being a $20 million contract.
Right.
So like if you're hyper intentional about that, it could lead to amazing results.
Right. So going to, you know, finding out whether it's your potential customers, decision makers, or influencers to deals, spending time in their hangouts. But doing that not just to go and have a couple of drinks, but actually intentionally go with the goal of making connections, getting introductions, understanding their space.
Yeah. And Alex, I'll give you a real simple question that anybody could ask.
Okay.
That like we had this monster deal. It was with AT&T. We were trying to get into, right? It was a net new opportunity. AT&T is massive in the States, internationally as well. And essentially we were trying to get into them. And it was one of those appointments where we flew, we drove, we went across country, and then we were in the meeting, and there's so many people involved with it. Eventually we came to and found out that, oh, we just signed an agreement for what your solution is like a couple months ago, or we're only like halfway through our agreement, which sounds ridiculous, but for big companies, sometimes It's trying to get to that needle in the haystack of the right person, depending on the solution or something. And so this question totally changed the trajectory of reps' lives, the division I was working on, and the company. And that question for that failed result that we got at that time, all I asked them was, hey, what other groups or associations do you participate in? Like, what do you highly recommend? And like, is there anything that you work with from an IT leadership perspective? He referred us to that group I mentioned to you before. When at that meeting, so he was at the board level, we sponsored it at that board meeting, then we got introduced to the company who sought us out, and then we got a $20 million contract from it.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's interesting. So talk to me. Okay. So let's assume that an organization has figured out who they're trying to sell to, in terms of the types of companies. What's often a challenge that I've heard, and this was actually a question that someone asked me to make sure to ask you today, was how do you figure out the right people? Because enterprise organizations can be a real beast, and they're, just figuring out titles is part of the challenge. So how do you figure out the right people or person you need to be dealing with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so are you talking about like before you get into the opportunity, or are you talking? Yeah. So, cause like we sold solutions too that it wasn't, the decision maker wasn't consistent for every opportunity. So sometimes it would be supply chain, sometimes it would be the CIO, sometimes it would be head of operations. So it was consistently inconsistent, if that makes sense, right? Because that's what you're going to get with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies that have multi functional departments. So anyways, unfortunately, what you have to do is you have to, when you prospect into them, you have to prospect to all the different areas. So you can't, there's not like a silver bullet. Latching onto those vertical specific industry and functional specific solutions will shortcut a lot of time. However, what I saw was the most critical is not just with the prospecting, but when you're trying to convert that into a new opportunity. I'll give you an example. So there's two questions that people can ask at the beginning of a sales process to save years of time potentially working on an opportunity that they have no chance of getting. And so I'm going to tell you those if you want to hear. Is that cool?
Yeah, please.
So basically we were working on an opportunity. It was a large hospital network, and there was 9 hospitals, one of the largest in the Midwest. And basically we worked on this deal for 2 years. We probably had 30 meetings, went through the most obnoxious RFP you'll ever see. And there's 32 vendors that participated, and we're one of the final 2. And then we ended up finishing in 2nd place. So we were the first loser. And what happened at that meeting we found out that there was a player that we didn't even know about that was one of the strongest decision makers involved in that opportunity that we had no meeting with, no visibility, no interaction at all, because we were buried in all the rest of the mess. And the reason why that happened was because we were focused on who has the budget now, right? Who actually, not who makes the decision, and I'm doing air quotes if you're listening, but who actually has the budget now, right? Who pays for it with the check? That gives you visibility to the department you focused on. The other question we didn't ask that killed us is who's going to have the budget after we implement, because it changed.
Right.
So the decision maker effectively was different. Even though we were being told that this person owned it, they were reassigning it to a different person. And so we never made that mistake again. And then we ended up getting another $75, $80 million in like half the amount of time that it took for that sales cycle, because we learned that hard lesson.
Right. So understanding not only who's owning the budget today, but where the budget's going to sit for the next 2, 3, 5 years afterwards. And so basically that's coming down to qualifications. So doing more in-depth upfront qualification, so there's no surprises later on.
Yeah, and I know we talked a little bit before. I call it decision-making funnels. So like one of the like most critical areas for any enterprise sales process at the beginning, like you're saying, qualification, is like essentially on that first meeting, you have to be able to stack rank of the departments, which one's the top one, which one's the second one, which one's the third one in terms of priority and decision making. Because that's the other thing. like you could waste so much time if you're not focused on the right people, saying all the right things to the wrong person. And
Yeah,
so that allows you to steer your focus accordingly.
for sure. And okay, in terms of getting that first contact, getting that first connection, what are the channels that you were using? Were you using, LinkedIn, email, some inbound, in-person events, combination thereof? Like, how are you doing it?
Yeah, it was a combination of everything. You have to take a multi-channel approach now because some people like email, some people hate email, some people like LinkedIn, some people like video. What I would tell you that was pretty interesting is that if people have like there's two things. You got to have the consistency component no matter what you do. And then you got to have the quality creative component to it. If you don't have those two, like if you think about it, it's kind of like the popular guy or the popular girl in high school where they have everybody coming to them. That's what these big companies are like. So you have to have a truly unique and customized outreach method if you really want to break through and get that attention from them. So.
Okay, when you talk about unique and customized, give us an example of what that looks like.
Yeah. So there's a combination. Have you heard of the Dream 100 strategy?
No, I actually haven't.
You haven't heard of that? Okay. It's by a guy named Chet Holmes. So he was hired by Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger hired him for one of his companies. This was in the 80s, and he created this strategy. And basically, he looked, and this aligns with the perfect customer strategy I was telling you about, but it was basically in the magazine space for advertising, right? Which is like, all right, dude, whatever. How is this applicable today? How is this applicable to tech sales? And I'm not 100 years old. If you're not seeing me right now, I'm just talking about my early 40s. So anyways, what the deal was is he looked at the market and he realized that there was, of the 1,400 people that were out there, there was 100 companies that spent 80-90% of the ad spend from his competitors. So all they did was they had pig-headed discipline where they were consistent in terms of their follow-up, but he was a different believer. He gave gifts. Every 2 weeks, he would send a different unique gift. And you could kind of put these in groupings, but he did that consistently to stick out. And so over time, what happened is people can't ignore you if you keep sending them stuff. We deployed this a little bit today. Someone I was working with, once COVID started, and he sent like COVID, what was it? What do we call it? It was like a COVID relief pack, or it was something silly like that. But basically, he sent something, a bottle of wine, really small bottle of wine, and something else with a handwritten note. And he had actually people reaching out to him, thanking him like proactively before he even followed up after the first time. Right. So out of 25 people, he got 8 people to respond, and he got 4 appointments out of that. And it might not sound like a big deal, but if you're looking at each one is spending $30,000 a month or more, then that's tough to make happen. And that was on the first like situation of it. So we would integrate strategies like that with standard outbound with messaging, and then lump that together with strategic networking with vertical functional events and associations that they had. And so we kind of wrapped all those together and then like leveraged LinkedIn on top of it, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. I think I've had clients using the kind of gifting approach before to, I guess, just stand out and cut through some of the, because if busy execs might be getting, goodness, tens, hundreds of outbound requests a month. So it's how do you stand apart from that? So that's quite interesting that you were using something similar. Talk to me around once you're in an enterprise deal then. So, we're in a deal. One of the big challenges I've heard people having is, and I experience this myself, is you get lost in this beast of an organization and your momentum in the deal can really slow down. And, initially timelines might have been 12 months and then suddenly that's pushed out and out and out. So what are some of your strategies or things that you and the team did to keep momentum going in these big deals?
Yeah. Well, so kind of like what I was telling you with decision-making funnels, there's the aspect of like knowing where to focus on, right? That's like the what, that's the department, right? What department are you focusing on? And in what priority order is that? So that's step one. Step two is having a relationship strategy. Most people do not have relationship strategies when they look at these big, hairy accounts. And because relationships could help you push a deal forward exponentially, or it could stall it out. Because people will literally help you move stuff forward faster if they truly enjoy spending time with you and your time, and you help them. So, and when I say that too, it's almost like looking at it horizontally and then looking at it vertically, and then continuously rating them as you go through the sales process of like, and the rating scale I use is like, okay, a 1 is someone that won't return my calls or meet with me. A 5 is someone who will meet with me outside of the group. And a 10 is inviting me to like their kids' birthday parties. You know, like that's the scale. And so then you can keep working on it. And so that'll create momentum the higher you up rank your relationships. The second piece is like, you really truly have to manage it as a project and facilitate pushing the meetings forward. And it almost takes, like, if you look at the shape of an enterprise deal, you kind of got it. You got the initial meeting, right, to create enough doubt with a higher level person, ideally, who wants to bring in the group, right? Then you bring in the group, you have the meeting, you present, they say, all right, this is a good idea. Let's do some discovery. Let's look at this deeper. And then what happens is it goes into an abyss, right? So a really cool trick that anybody could use that's listening to this, it's super simple, is after you get that initial group meeting and the executive sponsor or the C-level is like, yep, we're going to look at this further. This is worth investigating. Then what you do is you circle back with them and say, hey, this is or I should say you do it in the meeting. This is our customer success path of like the best engagements we've done. And these are the steps that we need to take. And this is the time frame in which it happens. Now, here's the cool part, Alex. You circle back, everybody's like, yeah, that's great, right? And then they go in their different ways, and usually the deal stalls. However, something really cool and simple is you do two things. One is you basically work with that executive sponsor, C-levels admin after that meeting and get the most critical time on the calendar, like for the strategy or the findings meeting, the proposal meeting, get it on the calendar then. Because then what happens is that forces the people below them to get the project done in time. So what you're doing then after that is you send an email out to the group saying, hey, this is and you send invites out, even if it might be 2-3 months out. You send invites out for those proposal dates. Then what you do is you send an email out to the entire group, copy the C-level executive, and then put a list of dates and responsibilities of who's going to execute on what prior to that time. So then what'll happen is if you start to get lag in the middle of the deal, you can say, hey, John, I know we need to get this ready. And I know you had to cancel the meeting because you're busy and something came up, but we need to schedule it for tomorrow or the next day because I need X amount of time to be ready for the CFO's schedule, which is happening on this date. And most of the time they'll comply because bigger companies have more of a hierarchical, I guess you could say, structure, where they have a lot of respect for those higher level people.
So it's really about almost creating a plan, like a pathway from here's where we're at today, first early conversation through to successful project outcome. Here are the steps that we need to take, and then actually holding your prospect to account on that.
Yeah, and you could even send weekly updates too to the group. This is the progress we've made. This is what's happened, or bi-weekly updates, right? Every 2 weeks, because then it does two things. It holds people accountable, but it keeps people engaged because they know what's going on. So it's not like they meet with you and then they talk to you 4 months later and they're like, all right, so what's going on with the program we talked about, right? So you're maintaining that front of mind. And you could also send one-off emails too to keep that C-level engaged. So then if you run into those barriers, we're like, hey, really excited for our meeting. However, I'm having problems getting this information. Would you mind pinging your director and having them send that over? Then the message comes and then voila, you get like everything you needed plus 10. You know what I mean? Because their boss's boss is asking for it.
And what about in competitive situations? Would you have the same approach? So where you're coming up against, 2, 3, 10 competitors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so are you talking like an RFP approach or RFI approach or?
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So I qualify, like when I had my team qualify RFIs or RFPs really hard, unless we created the RFP or the RFI with the customer.
Right.
Because if you do that, then obviously you could make the rules of the game that favor you and your situation, versus if you're walking in cold, somebody's already done that and you're reacting to someone else's rules. So I would walk away from a lot. And there's really, I mean, we can go down that path too, Alex, if you want to talk about it. There's really easy ways where you can do that when you're in prior, to like architect and create the RFP that you want, so it favors you and your solution.
Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that, because I know that's something that certainly companies I've worked with have seen, and that's often been my advice to people is, hey, look, if you're not involved before the RFP is written, then it's, think very carefully before you put in much effort here, because your odds are pretty slim. So yeah, talk a little bit about crafting the RFP process before it's built.
Yeah. And so you kind of get that. It's like, all right, we really like your solution, Alex. However, we're going to do an RFP on this 3 months down the road. We're not ready to talk about it right now. We'll reach out to you and re-engage with you. Something really cool that people responded really well to at big companies is because, and I'll tell you the reason why, is people are inherently lazy, right? They wanted the fastest way to get from A to Z. So if you could help someone do that in a competent manner, they'll love you for it. So simple thing that we used to do all the time is we would have aggregate, maybe 2, 3, 4 different sanitized RFPs, where basically it doesn't have the company name or anything on it. And we would tell the customer, so these were like real RFPs. We just cleaned up and took off the names, right? And we would have them basically situationally aligned for what the customer situation was that we just met with. So we could say, hey, let's say, John, I know you're doing this RFP. Like, have you done RFPs in this space before? Well, we might have done something 4 years ago, or no, we haven't done anything. Well, you know what happens from a customer's perspective if they have to do that? They have to do all that shit themselves. They got to create that. That's a lot of work, man. RFPs suck. It's like a 40-page term paper that someone's got to put together. They don't want to do that, right? So we would sit down with them and say, basically, like, hey, would you want to see what some of your top competitors did to put together an RFP? And we'll show you a sanitized version, so you could just copy and paste it and use it in your RFP moving forward to like save you tons of time. And people will be like, I'm in. So that does 2 things. 1, you create the rules of the game. 2, you're already providing value to the customer before you even get in that selling process.
That's great. That's a great suggestion. And how successful were you with those? If you've crafted the RFP up front, what was your success rate then later on? High, right? I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, and I don't know the exact metrics. Like, but it's probably like, if you look at it, you probably have like a 75% chance if you have competent staff on it, or 80%, versus like one you're reacting to, you might be at like 5%.
Yeah.
Or 10%, depending on how competitive the space is, right? So like, it's like, that's the art too, is like getting really good at saying no to big opportunities if they don't fit exactly what you need, because like people get like, oh wow, it's like this big sexy deal that's worth so much money. However, they don't qualify the time, and you could literally break your company if you don't have those metrics in place, because you're focused on the wrong deals that you're not going to get.
That's the thing. One of the other challenges, especially when you're the little guy selling to a big company, is getting bullied around pricing at the negotiation table. What are some of the things that well, firstly, have you seen that? And secondly, what are some of the things that you'd recommend people do to avoid that, because of that kind of seeming balance of power challenge?
Well, I'll tell you this. It doesn't matter if you're a big company. It doesn't matter if you're a small company. You're going to get bullied either way. Like basically, like I've developed relationships with sourcing VPs that I've sold to, or my team sold to. And they'll tell me, like, literally, we have a reverse quota. So like we have to hit $40 million in savings over the next 12 months, and we get a bonus if we do. Like that's how their comp plan's set up. So that drives behavior, right? However, ways to kind of overcome that before they're even an issue, there's a couple ways that you could do it. I talked about the relationship strategy earlier on. And what'll happen is, if you effectively execute that, horizontally and vertically. And sometimes like the best relationships you have in an account could be at like a lower, like a manager level or something like that, right? Where a manager who's just an influencer in the solution has, you know, is highly involved, is responsible for managing the project. And the reason being is when it gets to that, if you do a really, really good job of building relationships along the way, they'll literally tell you where you need to be to get the deal.
Mm.
They'll tell you your competitor's price, and they'll tell you what source you don't want. They'll give you the exact playbook on how to get it done if you ask the right question to the right person at the right time. And so that's one of the things that we used to effectively use is like you build up, you know, everybody always talks about deposits and withdrawals, right? You build up so many deposits of goodwill by trying to make them look good and meet their individual goals that when it comes out time to like try and bring home the bacon, you've been lobbying for them and creating value the whole entire time. Like think about the manager who you helped write and create the RFP to save 20 hours in time. At the end of the process, you're like, hey man, so who are we competing with exactly here? Where do they stand? It gives you really visibility and massively exponentially increases your negotiating position because you know the cards that the other person's holding. You know, so that'll help you. The other thing that works really well with big companies too is that intentionally, and you got to be careful how you do this, but intentionally keeping the dollar amount really small for the initial deal, because sometimes it'll fly under the radar because of dollar approval thresholds. And so you could get in as like a proof of concept, then do a proof of scale, and then do a massive expansion. We've done that before where we start off really small, but then get in non-competitively. So our margins are massive once we start to get, you know, the full rollout in place. So that's another way to do it as well.
I think your point on the individual relationships piece is actually really good though. This is something I always teach people is make sure you don't just qualify your opportunity from a business perspective, but also look at what is the person you're dealing with or people you're dealing with, what do they care about? And how can you make them look good and help them, you know, for example, if you're working to sell a deal and you're working with someone who's really ambitious and they're trying to get a promotion, for example, look good in front of their boss, how can you make them look good, build that goodwill so that they're going to be your champion in the organization? So I think that's a really, really useful point. And you know, probably one of the big things I think, particularly selling to large organizations, that you need to consider is there's the business impacts of what you do, but also what are the impacts to the personal people you're dealing with too.
Yeah, you're dead on with that. Because like, think about it this way. This is like what motivates every individual and every opportunity. There's two things. There's logic and there's emotion, right? And so you have like, think about this invisible force that's coming down. It's above the ownership group. That's the vertical. Then it hits the ownership group. PE firms, VC firms, privately, public, they all have different motivations and timeframes for achieving financial goals. That presses down on the C level. C level then presses down on the individual department. What happens is, and yeah, I'm sure you're in alignment with me on this, Alex, just based on your response there, but like basically there's two things. Every individual at a big company has dollar approval thresholds. And like there's a Fortune 50 company where a senior director only had a $50,000 sign off. You know, so like be really cognizant of that. But every individual at every level of the company usually has 3 to 5 KPIs that they're held accountable to. That basically identifies tangibly, are they doing their job well or not? You can help them blow those out. That'll help you on the logic side, right? While also making their life easier. Then you got the emotional side. And that's more the relationship piece of like, what are they passionate about? If they had free time to spend outside of work, what would they spend it on? And how can you connect with them at an emotional level? Because then if you're hitting on both of those with up and down the organization and then horizontally as well, you get like a network effect of people pushing versus you like humping everybody's leg trying to get the deal
done. Exactly. Persistence only goes so far. No, that's a really good point. I think the emotional side is actually also not appreciated enough often, because, you know, ultimately, like my view on this, and it'd be interesting to get your take, is, you know, decisions whether you're selling, you know, a $50 widget or a $5 million something is ultimately an emotional decision, and the rational side of thing kind of comes in afterwards. But you have to connect with people on an emotional level to get buy-in. And then people will justify it to themselves afterwards if they like you or if they feel like you've got them and understood them. And that's why we see all the time that organizations make software or any kind of purchasing decisions that actually aren't necessarily the best piece of software
Yeah.
for that business. And it's usually because of either relationships or connecting on an emotional level with the right people in the business.
Yeah.
Would
No,
you agree with that?
oh, total. And I'll even take it one step farther because like I heard this is people don't buy things, they buy the emotions from that they think they're going to get from those things,
Yeah.
right? So, and yeah, dude, I've seen it all the time, man. I've seen companies buy stuff that makes no freaking sense, but they're emotionally attached to it, whether it's their own personal agenda, whether they love the rep, whether they love the company.
Mm,
So yeah, I agree with you, man. That's spot on.
mm. It's interesting. Look, I just want to open it up for any questions. Maybe I'm covering all the ones that people wanted to ask, but if there's any other questions that you feel like we haven't covered, chuck them in the Q&A, and we'll cover them off in these kind of last 5-10 minutes. Um, Anything, Ryan, that you think we haven't covered that you think is really crucial to consider, and maybe some of the differences between selling to large companies and smaller companies that you need to keep in mind?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I would think, something that's really critical right now for today's environment in the world is you have to have a short-term ROI that's totally
Okay.
transparent and obvious. And what I mean by that is, at least it's the way in the States, like the next 90 to 180 days, like you have to be able to identify like the tangible business outcome that people are going to experience from working with you. So that's one thing that I would say is hypercritical. The other thing too is, and like you could orchestrate really big deals. Like it's interesting now because there's all these methodologies. So there's like 17 selling methodologies right out there. What's your thoughts on methodologies, on the selling
Um,
method?
my thoughts on it are they all use and share very common basic principles with each other. And some are better than others, but I think broadly they're all just basic kind of psychology wrapped up in some marketing fluff. And my view on it is like all the information out is available. So I'm not really a proponent of one particular methodology or another. I think it's, take the best bits of all of them. Um, yeah, I'm kind of the view of, just get it all out there, all the information out there, and just use all the tools.
Well, most of them are like selfish, right?
Mm,
And so the last one was the Challenger set was made in 2010, 2011 is when it was issued. So think about how much the world's changed over that period of time.
mm,
Like it's insane. Like literally that was like a few years after the first iPhone was created. They're
mm,
like, I
mm,
like we're in a different, I mean, like AI wasn't really big back. Like there's so much that's different. And all of it's based around like what the seller needs. So really that's where it's like the best thing you could do to be really good at enterprise sales is really understanding like the buying process of the individual company you're working with, because they're not consistent at all.
mm,
There's
mm.
patterns, but they're not usually consistent across the board. So I would say that's one of the big things. And then like the other thing that I would take away is like every single meeting you have, be intentional with what questions are you going to ask strategically, tactically, and then what are you going to do that meeting to move the ball forward a couple yards, or
Mm,
move the rugby ball forward, soccer ball, whatever. I'm trying to talk international here, Alex.
mm,
But
mm.
but yeah, those are the critical things. So looks like we got a question that popped up though. So we
Yeah,
could.
we've got one from the Parkable guys. We've got Josh, and I think the team, by the sounds of it, have all tuned in. Interested in speeding up enterprise deals. Can you give us an example of how you've covered off all the info required for all the departments, finance, admin, procurement, etc.?
Yeah. So Josh, can you tell me what you're selling, or do you know what he's selling, Alex?
Yeah, so they're selling parking software to he'll be talking about selling parking software to kind of mid to large size companies So that will enable them to kind of better manage their parking allocations for both internal and external visitors.
Yeah. So, and do you know what the average sales cycle length is?
Josh, what's the average sales cycle length? If you want to pop that in the chat, that'll be useful.
Yeah. So
6 months.
Okay. So, I think like the best way, it's hard to without having a live dialogue. But what I would say is like to speed up the deal is, and if you're doing a 6 month deal and you're talking mid-size or larger, I think it's like you have to get buy-in on the initial meeting with the customer in terms of like what is the cost of the problem you're solving. Is it a $1 million problem, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, 500,000, whatever. So you have to get the customer, and you probably have to work with them on that in terms of identifying the exact dollar amount of the cost of the problem. And then you have to get them to link in their brain, like, because almost think of it this way. We were talking about logic and emotion. Logic is like the gatekeeper for getting to the emotion. If you don't pass the logic piece, you're not even getting to phase two. So you have that really understanding of like what's going on there. And in terms of doing that, like you want to truly understand, like with the front end or the initial piece, how they are going to make that decision, who's involved. Like I said, you're going to have the size of the problem, but then link the spread. So like if you're solving a $500,000 problem and your cost is $100,000, then you could tell them like you're going to get a $400,000 return potentially, or give a range or percentages if you don't want to give exact numbers, right? But then once that links in your customer's head, you then ask the next question of like, okay, where does that rank in terms of your priorities? Is that a top project? Is that not significant enough? And part of it might be qualifying the opportunity out, because they might be like, yeah, that really doesn't do much for me. Or yeah, that would change my year and that would align with helping me hit my bonus, right? Then you double down on that and leverage that to push that forward. So I would say quantifying that. And then also the three things that buyers look for now are, is the solution customized? Are you easy to work with? And are they confident in the tangible result you're going to provide? So those are the three things you hit on. So I know there's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's it. And then the other thing I mentioned before about like mapping out the entire process, putting it on the calendar with like actual calendar meeting invites, and then don't rely on someone on their end to push the agenda forward. You literally have to do that for each key component in person and force the additional meetings, and then that'll speed up the process just by you focusing on it.
Yeah, I think what you said there, and that's a great answer. And I think what you said there around the quantifying the scope of the problem is really important, because that's going to help you either bump the priority up if you can really quantify that and actually discover during qualification if that's a big problem. If it's an actual costly problem, then suddenly that might bump it up on their priority list. It might have just been something they were kind of interested in, but if they find out actually this is the way we're doing things today is costing us $1 million a year in OpEx, if you can then use that, then you might be able to turn your 6 months into 3 months. You might be able to bring it forward. And I think the other piece that you've talked about in terms of the plan, calendaring things in, absolutely, treat it like you're project managing your potential client almost. And sometimes you have to hold them to account. And if they're slowing down, it's like, hey guys, you told us that you wanted to solve this problem in 6 months. Well, we're at risk of not being able to do that because John over here isn't giving us the piece of information we need right now. Is this still a timeline that you guys are working towards, or has things changed? And actually project managing them through a little bit.
Well, yeah, man. And can I add one part? Because I forgot something that I think is critical. So there's really two like components to the project management phase when you're looking at pushing a customer forward. There's the front end, like initial meetings. And once you get past that gate, there's like the discovery and the understanding, and then getting you to basically like the findings discussion is what I would call it. And like, I don't care what you're selling, you should have like some kind of discovery assessment to be able to tangibly identify the gap from where the customer's at to where you're taking them. And then at that point, you need to have another project plan. And that project plan is the implementation plan. So I call it the reverse close. So basically, you get the customers buying that once again at that meeting, like, hey, if we could tangibly execute on this, these are the potential results. Does this look good? You know, you get all those confirmations, right? Like, yeah, that looks great, Ryan. So, okay, so when would you want to implement? You want to implement, you know, will we be able to implement in January, February? When do you want to implement? And they'll be like, then what'll happen is one of two things. They'll give you a date and they'll also give you objections, right? Like, oh, well, this is probably more of a May thing for next year, 2021. You're like, well, why is that? Well, we got this project, and there's so much work involved with this. Well, what work do you think's involved with this? It's actually, it would take one of your guys 3 hours to implement the main piece of this. Oh, well, we can move it up then, right? People have these false assumptions in their head. And so then you get the dates of like, okay, well, if you want to implement in February, then this is what needs to happen prior, and you reverse close them based on the other like gates that they need to pass all the way from negotiating the contract to decision to all those components.
Yeah, exactly.
It's their timeline, man. It's not, you know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. It's, you know, with sales, it's a collaboration. It's not just us pitching to people. It's actually a collaboration of, and if you can get them to give you the timeline, that's even better, because then it's theirs. And then, you know, it's much better that they're working off their timeline than the timeline we've given them. Even if we've led them there, as long as they buy into that, then they're less likely to deviate from it later on.
Exactly.
Any other final questions, guys? Otherwise, it looks like I've done my job well and asked all the ones that people wanted to know about. Awesome.
And Josh, was helpful as well? Did you get everything you needed as well? Guess so.
I'm assuming yes. Well, look, Ryan, it's been great to chat with you today. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned some stuff, and I hope Josh just said there. That's an awesome response. Thanks. So that's great. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat today, and look forward to doing another one. Oh, will we get a recording? Yes, Rona, there'll be a recording as well. I'll share that afterwards. So yeah, Ryan, thanks a lot so much. It's been awesome chatting with you today. Any final kind of thoughts, tips, tricks from you?
Yeah, I mean, like, this has been my jam, and I had to learn the hard way how to do this. So like, I'd love to help you guys out. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm highly active on there. Or Ryan@whalesellingsystem.com is my email. So love to help anybody out. If you got further questions, I created a course on how to do all this. But right now I'm focused on more helping companies scale their business in this area. So awesome being on though, man. Looking forward to having you on my show. I know we talked about that as well. So I get to flip it around and ask you some hard questions. So let everybody know about that one as well.
Looking forward to it. And thanks everyone who joined us live. Cheers. Chat to you soon, Ryan. Bye.